Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks for being here this morning. Right now on Morning News Now, hazardous haze. Millions of people are waking up to cloudy skies again. The smoke from wildfires burning in Canada descending deep into the U.S. and spreading across several states. The poor air quality is setting off a series of disruptions from major airports to city streets.
Some people aren't realizing that. They're just like, wow, this is so crazy. But no, it is definitely affecting us.
You kind of smell it, don't you smell it? Yeah, so it's just kind of weird. It's a weird day.
This morning, as firefighters in Canada close in on the flames, we'll take a look at when we can expect a break from this. We have team coverage just ahead. Notified new developments in one of the investigations into former President Donald Trump. This morning, the former president is facing a possible indictment. Sources say federal prosecutors have told Trump's lawyers that he is the target of a criminal investigation. We'll bring you the latest information we have, plus what it could mean for his presidential campaign. Prayers for the Pope. This morning, Pope Francis is recovering in the hospital after undergoing intestinal surgery yesterday. We'll take you to Rome for an update on the 86-year-old pontiff's condition. And making waves, an avid fisherman is doing his part for the environment. Joe takes us to Ohio for a first-hand look at how he and some of his friends are working to clean up one of Ohio's iconic rivers. Joe in a boat. There we go.
And I didn't add to the trouble in the river by falling in, so it was all
Probably good.
It was all good.
It's probably been unfortunate. All right, we begin this morning with that hazy and dangerous air that's enveloping huge parts of the country, and then the wide impact, that's having.
Right now, 100 million people are at risk because of poor air quality from the wildfire smoke. This is what it looks like outside here in New York this morning. You can see the whole city enveloped by an eerie haze. And look at this time-lapse video starting at 11 yesterday morning. You can see the Manhattan skyline disappear behind an orange fog. During that time, for the second day in a row, New York recorded the worst air quality in the world among major cities. What does that mean? Well, an air quality index higher than 150 is considered unhealthy. Higher than 300 is hazardous. Well, New York City yesterday hit 342, and some parts of the country were even higher than that. The smoke and cloudy skies are not only having an impact on our health, it also caused the FAA to issue a ground stop yesterday, temporarily pausing all flights into LaGuardia and slowing air travel into Newark and Philadelphia. And this morning, that smoke is still sticking around. We have full coverage just ahead. We're going to talk to Washington Post climate reporter Shannon Osaka, and meteorologist Angie Lastman will tell us when we can finally expect a break from all this. But let's begin with NBC News correspondent George Solis at Philadelphia International Airport. So, George, the air quality caused thousands of cancellations, and we also had more than 20,000 delays yesterday, including where you are in Philly. So walk us through that. Tell us how things are looking this morning.
Yeah, good morning, Joe. I don't think anyone or anything can really replace those images of the orange sky in New York yesterday. Here in Philadelphia, the air still hazardous. So as you walk into the airport, you can still see some people wearing their masks because they are taking those safety precautions. Not many delays here at Philadelphia International this morning, about 12 about the last time I checked. Obviously, that's good news with many people that are trying to travel today. As they know, many flights were delayed, canceled. Philadelphia issuing that ground stop. They lifted it yesterday late evening, saying that flights would be able to resume. But of course, airlines and airports are monitoring conditions very closely because the smoke is still very dense in some areas. We can take a live picture outside Philadelphia International this morning. Again, doesn't look nearly as bad as it did yesterday, but that haze is still there. There's still some smog and some folk driving through the city. You could feel it in your eyes, in your lungs, and this is why health officials are urging people to obviously stay indoors, wear a mask if you are going to be out, because again, right now the air isn't just hazardous for those with health conditions, it is hazardous for all. Will it start to lift? We are expecting that. But again, this morning here at Philadelphia International, flights are on time, but people are still being urged to get here early, check with their airlines to make sure some of those delays don't continue today. Joe.
You know, flying a little scary for some folks right now. Is there anything airports are doing or even can do to try and mitigate some of these travel issues?
Yeah, right now, best thing you can do is obviously if you have your airline's app to obviously keep an eye to see if there's any delays that'll creep up throughout the day. The airlines are doing their best to manage this. They have adequate staffing and crews for airlines, TSA, to get people in and out of airports as quickly as possible. We saw that increase during the Memorial Day weekend, but unfortunately with conditions like this, there's not a whole lot you can do to predict. Right now, looking at the misery map through FlightAware, JFK seems to have the most congestion in their airspace, but again, it is still early in the day, so we might see that map turn a lot more red, especially if that fog doesn't start to lift earlier and later throughout the day, Joe.
So folks who are traveling today, what should they expect? Are there any tips for what they should do?
Absolutely. Like anything else, get here on time. Don't leave anything to chance. You want to make sure that you have enough time to catch your flight. If you don't have the chance to check a bag, maybe try to bring that on with you as a carry-on. If you have pre-check, obviously go through that to try and mitigate as much of the time constraint that you may have trying to get on a flight, especially if you have a connecting flight. And obviously, if you're flying in and around the Northeast today, definitely keep those phones handy to keep an eye on those air quality conditions and, of course, any other delays that may ramp up. But the expectation is that some of this fog and some of this smoke should lift throughout the day, and hopefully conditions start to improve because, yeah, guys, it is nasty out there. No other way to put it.
All right, George Solis in Philadelphia, thank you so much. So if you're flying today or if you just want to go outside and walk, the big question, how much longer is this going to last?
That's right. Let's check in on that with your Morning News Now weather forecast with Angie Lastman. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Good morning, guys. The short answer to that question is that by the weekend, especially by the end of the weekend, we'll see major improvements. We still have a couple of days where it's going to be hazy. It's going to be dangerous out there as far as air quality is concerned, but we will see some improvements just in time for, especially by the time we get into next week. Let's start at the beginning, though, as we talk about all the records we broke yesterday. We, of course, were seeing record air quality, low air quality yesterday in New York since records started being taken. So that's pretty impressive. We came up on top of the worst air quality across the world. Detroit also making it onto that top 5, coming in at the 5th worst yesterday. Do we see many improvements today? Not in those areas specifically, but again, as we wait through the next 2 to 3 days, we will see better conditions. Still 100 million people impacted from this unhealthy air. This is specifically from the wildfire smoke. We have 120 million people that are impacted by poor air quality when you add in those ozone alerts that we're dealing with as well. But specifically when it comes to the wildfire situation and that smoke filtering in, we're still dealing with it coming in, moving across parts of the Great Lakes, parts of the Midwest. You're going to wake up to the hazy conditions in New York, Philadelphia, Detroit, all of those same kind of locations that we dealt with difficult conditions yesterday. It'll be a little worse for Philadelphia today. Even Washington, D.C. could see some of the worst air quality as compared to yesterday. But stretching really from Delaware to southern New York, that's where we see the bulk of the unhealthy to very unhealthy and hazardous even. So when we're talking hazardous, that means dangerous for everybody, no matter how much time you're spending outdoors. So wanting to take those precautions or just stay indoors altogether. Here's some of the latest air quality numbers that we're dealing with right now. You can see Allentown coming in at 312, Philadelphia 298. Earlier today, that number was well into the 300s and even 400s into the overnight hours. New York 184 still coming in the unhealthy range. If you are trying to get outdoors and you want to check in on these numbers, remember you can always go to airnow.gov and get those updates for whatever city you live in. But again, this is going to be something we'll deal with through today. Here's how the smoke progresses. This is 5 o'clock this afternoon. Still smoke around. The heaviest of it stretched through parts of Pennsylvania, over the Great Lakes. Still dealing with the hazy skies, though, in much of the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast. Detroit, this is Friday at 5 p.m. You're still going to be in and out of that poor air quality as well. By the time Saturday rolls around, though, guys, we'll see some improvements, especially from Boston to Philadelphia. Still the hazy conditions in some spots, but it'll be a whole lot better than the glowing orange skies that we saw yesterday that were, I mean, jarring, really.
Yeah, no one wants a repeat of that again.
No, we don't.
Right. No, it was very, very scary outside. But even that, we're still talking about this 36 hours from now. Wow.
Yeah, we are. In those fires, they're starting to get under control, but of course it takes some time. And
Definitely.
We're finally going to see the weather pattern move out and shift the winds, which is really important for us here.
And it's hard to predict what's going to happen this year, but we expect this to be a bad wildfire season for Canada, which means we could have this experience periodically throughout the summer, right?
Definitely, and we're already off to a record-breaking start there. The reason for this, many of those fires started from lightning, but also they're dealing with, a heat dome, we call it, which is something you see more often with climate change. It's basically a stuck high-pressure system that keeps it really warm, leading to really dry vegetation. And of course, we know one lightning strike or a human-caused fire, and we've got fires out of control. climate change also plays a role, too.
Exactly what we're going to jump into right now. Angie Lastman, thank you so much. Good to see you. Well, let's bring in Shannon Osaka now. She's a climate reporter for The Washington Post and dig in on exactly what Angie was just talking about. Shannon, good morning. So I lived in New York for a decade. I have a bunch of friends who grew up here. Everybody's saying, I've never seen this before in New York City. Quickly followed typically by, is this climate change? Will we see this more? Walk us through that. What is climate change roles here? What impact are we seeing on the scale of wildfires in recent years? And then the potential for an event like this?
Well, it's funny. I mean, I'm from California, and in California, people have been seeing this for about the past 5 years or so. We have seen the orange skies before. We have seen this type of bad air quality, thick wildfire smoke, not being able to go outside for a week or more. So absolutely, yes, we are going to see more of this as climate change progresses. And the reason why is exactly what you were just talking about. As the atmosphere gets hotter, it dries out vegetation. That doesn't mean that climate change, sparked the wildfire. It didn't cause the lightning or the person who dropped their cigarette or anything like that. But it makes the conditions for wildfire more and more likely. In fact, Canada's Natural Resources Division has said that depending on how climate change unfolds over the next, several decades to 2100, they might see about double the amount of area burned than they do now. So we just know that climate change is making the conditions for wildfire more severe. We're going to see more areas burned, and that in turn is going to create more of these bad air days, days where the sky looks orange, days where you really can't go outside.
Absolutely. I grew up in Southern California prior to living here, and the smell here, I'm like, wow, it's reminding me of having to evacuate during wildfire seasons at home. You just touched on this, but, there's one thing is the event of the actual fires themselves. And then after that is this bad air quality we're seeing in several major cities. How is climate change connected to the way that this smoke and smog sort of hangs over areas, those weather patterns that Angie was just talking about? So in addition to the fires, what we might see after that?
Yeah, so I mean, we know that when there are hot conditions where you have these heat domes, where air is kind of stagnant and not really moving, that's when you get the worst bad air quality days. Now, in this case, there's weather patterns that are bringing the smoke down from New York, but we do know that over the past several decades, we have seen a lot more stagnant air days. This nonprofit research center, Climate Central, did an analysis, and they found that there's about 81% more stagnant air days in major cities in the U.S. than there were in the 70s. And so that just creates the conditions where, the smoke, bad air quality, particulate matter, it can't go anywhere, and it's just hanging over our cities, making it difficult to go outside.
What does this all mean in terms of trying to cut those global emissions? Where are we at? How much of an impact does that have? Tell us the latest there.
Well, we are in a stage where we continue to have extremely high global emissions year after year. Now, the good news is that certain developed countries, the U.S. has dropped its emissions in the last 10 years or so, so has Europe. But on a global scale, emissions are stagnant or still going up a little bit year after year. And in order to actually stop climate change from progressing, we need those global emissions to go to zero. That is a huge ask, and it is a huge project. But there is progress. We are seeing more growth of clean energy, and we just need to continue to push that forward. And I will say that, I reported on the orange skies over San Francisco a couple years ago. And what I saw after that is that it really activated a lot of people. It caused some tech people to say, I'm going to go into clean energy. I'm going to forget about software engineering for a while. And I wonder if we'll see the same thing here on the East Coast, where people really start to say, okay, I don't want this for my children. What do I have to do? How should I change my career? How should I change my life to try to mitigate climate change more?
Yeah, Shannon Osaka, I've been doing some reporting on that right now. Actually, a climate change trial is actually making it to trial in the state of Montana as young people are concerned about so much of this stuff. Shannon, we appreciate you being with us this morning. Thank you.
The investigation into the handling of classified documents by former President Trump is heating up this morning, and there are new indications that Trump could face an indictment. At a meeting with federal prosecutors on Monday, Trump's attorneys were told the former president is a target of the investigation. Two sources briefed on that meeting tell NBC News. A spokesperson for the Department of Justice declined to comment on this latest report. Trump's handling of classified documents came under investigation last year after they were discovered at his Mar-a-Lago home. A 184 of them were marked as classified. On social media yesterday, the former president said that he has not been told he is being indicted and reiterated that he has done nothing wrong. For more on these latest developments, we're joined now by NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley. Ryan, good morning to you. So walk us through all this. What does it mean to be a target in an investigation like this? What are the likely next steps?
Well, it's not great for if you're Donald Trump. And I think, we saw a lot of indications of this and previously just building up to this, right? You could kind of surmise this from just the fact that there's this open grand jury investigation that, who they're interviewing exactly. Obviously this was announced back in November that Merrick Garland made this announcement to appoint the special counsel to look into all of these issues surrounding Donald Trump after Donald Trump made his presidential announcement. So, it's not incredibly a surprise, but I think that it's clear now that we're getting to a real pivot point in this investigation, especially, I think, as we've seen indications that this investigation has basically shifted to Miami. And that's something that really we're only now learning, I think, in the past couple of days following this testimony by one of Trump's aides before the grand jury down there, that really this special counsel investigation into the documents issue specifically has really moved down to Florida and is really at a now pivot point. We saw the investigation unfold mostly in D.C., but it's pretty easy for federal prosecutors essentially to port all of that investigation down to Florida, present it before a grand jury, either by having an FBI agent come in and essentially summarize the testimony that happened in D.C., or by presenting a few new witnesses, so they can catch up to speed, I think, pretty quickly. And it would eliminate some of these jurisdictional questions, I think, that you would see if this case was brought in D.C., because most of these alleged activity happened actually in Florida. So that would essentially simplify this process. And I think that's what we're seeing now.
We have to remember there are two federal investigations here. Special counsel Jack Smith is investigating the Mar-a-Lago documents. He's also investigating January 6th. And sources familiar with the matter say that former Trump White House official Steve Bannon has now been subpoenaed by a federal grand jury in Washington. What more can you tell us about this case?
Yeah, it might feel like deja vu for voters for viewers a little bit, because they hear Steve Bannon subpoena and you think back, and if you remember, last year we saw a situation where Congress, through the January 6th committee, had subpoenaed Bannon. He sort of stiff-armed that investigation, and as a result was convicted on 2 charges of contempt of Congress and was sentenced to 4 months in federal prison, which is basically pending appeal at this point right now. He's working through some appellate issues, but that sentence is still hanging over his head theoretically down the line. This, of course, is separate. This is the Jack Smith investigation. And it's a lot tougher to sort of resist one of these subpoenas once you get them from grand jury, as we've seen all of these witnesses cooperate with that, because there are some pretty stiff penalties very quickly that if you don't that come about if you don't cooperate with a federal grand jury. So I think we're going to see Steve Bannon potentially come in here. And he's a key witness to a lot of these January 6 issues that are being under investigation by Jack Smith. All
right, Ryan, thank you so much.
Well, Pope Francis is recovering this morning after a 3-hour operation on Wednesday to repair a hernia. Doctors say the 86-year-old is in good spirits and should make a full recovery. NBC News foreign correspondent Claudio Lavanga is in Rome and joins us now with the latest here. Hey, Claudio, good morning. So what are we hearing from doctors right now about the Pope's surgery and how he's doing this morning?
Good morning, Savannah. Well, the Vatican just issued a statement in the last hour saying that following the abdominal surgery on Wednesday, last night, the Pope had a quiet and restful night, that he managed to sleep well, that he is alert and he's breathing spontaneously. Now, the statement also said the medical staff following Pope Francis at the Gemelli Hospital here in Rome said that the post-surgery checks and examinations are giving positive results. So that's also good news, and that he's expected to rest the whole day. Also, the Vatican said that the Pope is aware of the many messages of affection and closeness that are pouring in from around the world, that he's grateful for that, but he's also asking everyone to keep praying for him. Savannah.
Now, Claudio, this is just the latest health issue that the Pope is facing. We talked about this a lot yesterday. We've been covering this because he had bronchitis earlier this year, 2 years ago, part of his colon removed at this same hospital. Are all of that backdrop, is that having any effect on how doctors are treating his recovery?
Well, last night, on Wednesday night, the doctor that performed the surgery on the Pope met with us journalists just outside of Gemelli Hospital, and it was very clear that he said that the Pope has recovered fully from the previous health problems that he's had. First of all, in 2021, the colon surgery, he had 13 inches of colon removed following an infection there, and he spent 10 days in hospital. He said he's fully recovered from that. The bronchitis, he said he's recovered from that, and they also expect him to fully recover from this surgery too, because they said that it was successful, and as we saw from the statement this morning, he seems to be recovering fast and fine. Savannah.
Also, in a statement, the Vatican did say that this surgery shouldn't have any impact on the Pope's ability to travel, which seems like good news since he does have several international trips scheduled in the next few months. What is his schedule looking like for the summer?
Well, that's right. The next big trip he's undertaking is to Lisbon in Portugal. He wants to go there to attend the World Youth Day, an event that he really cares about. He's attended all of them since he's become pontiff. That's still on. Only literally the day before the surgery, 2 days ago, the Vatican published the itinerary, opened up for the accreditation process and all that. So it seems like that this surgery is not affecting that at all. Well, then there is a big trip coming up in September. He's supposed to go to Mongolia, but there is no indication that this surgery will affect the travel either, Savannah.
All right, Claudio, thank you so much.
Coming up on Morning News Now, soccer shocker, a major league move for soccer great Lionel Messi. Later this hour, more on his surprise announcement. He's coming to America, what it could signal for the future of the sport.
At first, though, flooded. New developments this morning out of Ukraine. President Zelensky gets a first-hand look at the destruction from the collapse of that critical dam and the widespread flooding it has caused. Stay with us.
A white woman who fatally shot her black neighbor through a door will face charges, including manslaughter. Now, the family of the victim, who was a mother of 4, they're continuing their calls for justice. NBC News Now correspondent Stephen Romo has more.
Tonight, Susan Lawrence behind bars, charged with manslaughter after police say she killed her neighbor by shooting through her front door.
We have arrested 58-year-old Susan Lawrence for the killing of Miss A.J. Owens.
Owens, a mother of 4, killed in front of one of her children on Friday. That incident coming after a long-standing neighborhood feud, according to police. Witnesses say it escalated with a dispute over an iPad, leaving a family motherless.
I am grateful for an arrest. Very disappointed that it took 4 days. Honestly, when is it okay in America to shoot someone behind a locked door?
Some community members outraged that Lawrence wasn't arrested earlier.
Charge her. You know who did it. Charge her.
Just 4 hours later, police making the arrest, explaining the legality of the stand your ground law caused the delay.
My detectives cannot complete an investigation without getting all sides of a story. And that night, all we had was one person's story, and that was the shooter's story.
Detectives ultimately concluding the shooter's self-defense claim did not justify her actions.
Without the activists, we are mighty afraid this would have been swept under the rug.
The family now calling on the state attorney to consider increasing that charge to murder.
We want him to zealously prosecute the killer of A.J. Owens just like he would do if the roles had been reversed and you had a black woman shoot a white woman through a locked metal door and kill her in front of her children.
Owens' family shattered by this unimaginable loss.
You may look at her and say, she didn't have much. She had it all.
Yes.
She had love. She had compassion.
Her children now grappling with guilt over the moments surrounding their mother's death. One of them had told his mom about Lorenz throwing a roller skate at them and swinging at them with an umbrella.
In his soul and his heart, it's his fault because he went home and told his mother what this woman did to him. Our 12-year-old blames himself for the death of his mother. His words was, "Grandma, Grandma, I couldn't save her. I tried to give her CPR, but I couldn't. I tried to give her CPR.
Our thanks to Stephen Romo for that report. The grandmother of those children says she, quote, prays that God gives her the strength, the wisdom, and the ability to raise those children as her daughter would have wanted. In international news, Ukraine is still reeling from Tuesday's catastrophic dam collapse, which flooded large areas of the country's southern Kherson region.
Yeah, this morning, President Zelensky visited the area to survey the damage and discuss emergency operations. Well, the trip comes as the first reported casualties of this particular disaster begin to emerge. NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez joins us now from Zaporizhia with the latest. Hey, Raf, good morning. So what is the situation on the ground like right now? It does not look good behind you. Tell us about these evacuation efforts.
Savannah, good morning. We are seeing an environmental and a humanitarian disaster unfolding across southern Ukraine right now. And that is because the Dnieper River is the lifeline of this region. But as you can see from this dried out marina behind me, water levels have fallen dramatically here in the 2 days since that dam explosion. And that is because the water that should be in the reservoir up here in Zaporizhia is instead rushing through what remains of that dam, and it is flooding onto the streets of Kherson and other communities downstream. Now, Ukrainian authorities say they've evacuated about 2,000 people from the west bank of the river, which they control, but they're very concerned about civilians on the Russian-occupied east bank, who they say have basically been left to fend for themselves. The Ukrainian military has actually been using drones to drop individual bottles of water to stranded civilians on the eastern side of the river. Just seems almost reminiscent of Hurricane Katrina, families on the roofs of their homes looking for help. Now, as you said, President Zelensky was down in Kherson earlier on today. He's calling for the international community to really step up to help people here. And this is not a trip without risk, guys. The Ukrainian authorities are saying Russian forces continue to shell the city of Kherson even as these evacuation efforts are underway.
So, Raf, when we hear Zaporizhia, we just automatically now think of the nuclear power plant there. Do we know how safe it is?
Yeah, so that is the big question right now. This is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. It is under Russian control. Both Russian and Ukrainian authorities are saying the situation at the plant is stable. And even with these diminished water levels, there is still enough water to keep the reactors at the plant cool. But as you can imagine, in this city, in the shadow of the nuclear power plant, people take this very, very seriously. Just yesterday, as you can see on your screen, there were nuclear disaster drills here. You had first responders in hazmat suits preparing for what they would do if there was a meltdown at the plant. Now, the head of the UN's nuclear agency, the IAEA, is expected to visit the plant in the coming days, so we may get a better picture then. Guys.
And, Raf, we know Ukraine and Russia have been blaming each other for this. Well, we did get the first reaction from President Putin to this disaster following a phone conversation with his Turkish counterpart. What did he say, and what is the latest on an investigation here?
So President Putin said this was a barbaric action. He said there needed to be a thorough international investigation. And guys, there is, of course, an irony here that the Ukraine says that it was President Putin's forces who blew up this dam and that they did it to stop Ukrainian troops crossing the river as part of this long-awaited counteroffensive. The U.S. has not been able to say definitively, in public at least, whether or not Russia was responsible, but U.S. officials are saying the evidence does appear to lean towards Russian responsibility. Now, President Biden is hosting the British Prime Minister at the White House later today, so it's possible that we may hear more about this from those leaders later on. Guys.
All right, Raf Sanchez, thank you very much.
More international news now, starting with breaking news in France.
NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley joins us now with more details. Hey, Matt, good morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. That's right. So a knife attack in a French alpine town has left several people injured, and among them, a few children. Now, France's interior minister said the assailant had been apprehended by police after the attack earlier today in a square in the lakeside town of Annecy. The Associated Press, quoting an unnamed interior ministry official, said that 4 children and 2 adults were wounded. In a tweet today, France's President Emmanuel Macron called the attack absolutely cowardly. On the other side of the world, 37 Chinese military aircraft flew over Taiwan's air defense zone and the Western Pacific earlier today, and this according to Taiwanese officials. The show of force prompted Taiwan to activate its missile defense systems and to scramble aircraft and ships. And the Chinese government didn't comment on what appeared to be a military exercise, but Beijing has regularly conducted flyover drills around the island of Taiwan, which it considers to be a breakaway part of its own territory. Now, some wild news out of Costa Rica and what looks like a mashup between Jurassic Park and the Bible. Now, a crocodile at a zoo appears to have had that species' first ever recorded virgin birth. Back in 2018, a female American crocodile laid 14 eggs in her enclosure after she had been living at the zoo in isolation for 18 years. Now, that is normal. What's so unusual is that one of the eggs contained a fully formed, stillborn baby crocodile. And scientists have since determined it was the result of facultative parthenogenesis, or reproduction without the genetic contribution of males. Now, that's a phenomenon that's been observed before in several other species, but this is the first time it's been seen in a crocodile. Guys?
Wow. No idea how I'm supposed to respond to that. All right.
Same. I think you just blew my mind.
We'll just let it be. All right, Matt, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt. Coming up, Republican rivalry. Former President Donald Trump and his former VP Mike Pence trading blows as the race for the White House heats up. We'll have the latest from the campaign trail.
And House on hold. Controversy on Capitol Hill after a protest that forced lawmakers to cancel all planned votes this week. This is Morning News Now.
Welcome back. We've been hearing from former Vice President Mike Pence after he became the latest person to officially throw his hat into the 2024 GOP presidential race.
During a speech in Iowa, Pence did not hold back when talking about his one-time boss, former President Donald Trump. NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns has more on the growing pool of candidates competing for that Republican nomination.
Well, former Vice President Mike Pence formally jumped into the 2024 presidential race and took his sharpest shots at his former boss yet. He was former President Trump's running mate. Mike Pence throwing his hat in the 2024 ring and taking direct aim at his former boss.
We cannot expect to unite the nation around an agenda of a politics based on grudges and grievances.
And Pence unleashing his sharpest criticism yet of the former president's actions on January 6th, when he refused Trump's push to overturn election results.
The American people deserve to know that on that day, President Trump also demanded that I choose between him and the Constitution. Now voters will be faced with the same choice. I chose the Constitution, and I always will.
Pence today embracing Trump administration achievements.
I was proud to stand by President Donald Trump every single day when we made America great again.
But questioning the Republican frontrunner's conservative bona fides on issues like abortion.
But now he treats it as an inconvenience, even blaming our election losses in 2022 on overturning Roe v. Wade.
The former vice president facing an uphill climb. Polls show Trump with a large lead, with another GOP candidate, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, also jumping in. Iowa voters weighing in on Pence.
He was more critical of Trump in his speech than he normally is. How did you feel about that?
Honestly, I don't really care for that. When you're running against someone who is ahead in the polls, you've got to take him on.
I wore a Trump hat for 7 years. Today I'm wearing Second Amendment and my mind is open.
But while in his speech, Pence, referencing Trump, said that someone who puts himself over the Constitution should, quote, never be president. Later in an interview, he also said that he would absolutely support whoever the Republican nominee is, which could very well be former President Trump.
All right, Dasha Burns, thank you.
Well, this morning, the Republican-led House is in turmoil, and because of that, all House business has actually ground to a halt.
In fact, GOP leaders have canceled all votes for the rest of the week. It's all because of that ongoing protest from a handful of House members. They're upset over the debt deal signed by President Biden last week. One of those Republicans, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, tweeted, quote, "House leadership couldn't hold the line. Now we hold the floor." NBC News congressional correspondent Julie Sirkin joins us now with more on this. So, Julie, we talked about this yesterday with you when we talked about them blocking a procedural vote on a bill about gas stoves. So where do things stand now with all votes canceled this week?
Well, it might seem like no big deal, right? The House just gets to go home a few days early. Not a big deal. They'll try again next week, except how the House works. They literally are completely paralyzed from doing any kind of governing, any kind of legislating because of these 10 or so members that blocked that rule on the gas stove legislation, that continue to block leadership from putting any piece of legislation on the floor and trying to get any work done. Now, they were in Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker's office, all day long yesterday. McCarthy was holding meetings also with his leadership team, trying to convince these members to stop blocking the rule vote, letting them to proceed and govern as they were elected to do. Here's what McCarthy told us last night after really being at an impasse with these folks.
I like the challenge. And you know what? I've got a challenge. I knew from day one, with a small majority, with people of strong opinions, with people who are bright and articulate, people who understand how to use the media as well. So I will listen to them. I will respect them all. But at the end of the day, we've got to come together as one.
Now, look, Majority Leader Scalise, who serves right with McCarthy, right alongside him, also said that this in many ways was something they expected, right? They have a very narrow majority. In many ways, this is shaping up to be reminiscent of that speaker fight McCarthy had in January with those 15 rounds of votes. So we'll see if they can get there.
So, Julie, in addition to this tension between Republicans and Democrats, we're also seeing some fissures in the Republican Party. A Republican member of Congress was quoted as labeling these Republicans who are holding up this vote as the dysfunction caucus. Walk us through what that means we could see. I mean, could some more moderate Republicans try to turn to certain Democrats to get legislation moving again? What would that alignment look like?
Well, unfortunately, that wouldn't even help them because that's the big fear moderates are having. If they are going to work on legislation, especially bipartisan legislation across the aisle, will their Republican conservative colleagues even allow them to do that? That's one of their fears, especially when you look at the politics of this, because some of them are in districts that President Biden won, for example, and they need to show that they can actually work for their American people. Other moderates I spoke to said this was a distraction. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene, not a moderate, a conservative, who told me yesterday that the majority needs to legislate, and this is not helping them.
And Julie, real quickly here, there was a hearing that had been scheduled for today on whether to hold FBI Director Chris Wray in contempt of Congress. It was canceled by the House Oversight Committee late last night. What happened there?
Yeah, Oversight Chair Comer was actually able to reach an agreement with the FBI for the Bureau to finally turn over this document they have. It's unverified, which is why the Bureau was hesitant to turn it over in the first place. But it alleges that then Vice President Biden allegedly had some kind of interference with a foreign agent. Now, again, this was not verified, which is why the FBI has been so hesitant to turn this over, but they've agreed to do it to avoid that contempt vote that was planned for today in the oversight panel. Now every member of the panel will get to see that document, and Speaker McCarthy praised that development as well.
All right, Julie Sirkin, thank you so much.
Thanks, Julie. Coming up, coming to America, shock in the sports world as soccer great Lionel Messi says he's heading to Miami.
When we come back, more on the move and what it means for the sport. This is Morning News Now. Welcome back. Now, 1 week into Pride Month, we're taking a closer look at the impact of anti-LGBTQ legislation. It is something that's impacting families across the country, and it's hitting especially close to home for one former Florida lawmaker, a Republican. Former State Representative Ileana Ross-Slayton says she sees the current conversation around trans youth legislation through a different lens compared with many of her former colleagues. It's because she has a transgender son. For our upcoming special Pride 2023 out front, I spoke with both of them, mom and son, about how they're staying hopeful in the face of adversity. Something you said back in 2019. You said at the time you had hope for the GOP, that the party was becoming more tolerant and more accepting when it came to these issues. I have to ask, 4 years later, has that hope faded at all?
It hasn't faded because for a long time I was in the hope business, and I'm still in the hope business. There's a deluge of stories about what is apparently the #1 threat to our American way of life, which is trans youth. Yeah, and I'm looking around and I say, we don't feel that way about Rigo, our son, who's a transgender male. I don't think that we're blinded by our love for Rigo. We see all of our children in the same way, unconditional love, because what's the alternative? Homelessness, drug use, kids getting kicked out of their homes, even contemplating suicide. And what we see is in Rigo, he's got wonderful values of kindness and looking out for our community. We couldn't ask for a better kid. And I wish that my party and our community and everybody's family would look at their children in the same way, no matter what they're going through. It's appalling. This is the low point for my party. I'm proud to be a Republican, but we better get our act together.
Rodrigo, I can see it brings a smile to your face to hear your mom talk about you in such glowing terms. I have to say, as someone who focuses on transgender policy, this deluge your mom was talking about this year, what has it been like for you?
Well, it's been heartbreaking for myself, but so many transgender people to feel like now there is a target being put on our backs, and especially for transgender youth, for our kids who are really being single-handedly targeted for all this negative legislation. You know, as was shared, I was very fortunate that my family accepted me.
Our thanks to Ileana, Ross Leitonen, and Rodrigo Heng Leitonen for taking time to speak with us. And you can see more of that interview and many other conversations with leaders in the LGBTQ+ community during our Pride 2023 Outfront special. It is streaming tonight at 10:30 p.m. Eastern, right here on NBC News Now.
Awesome, tonight.
Yes, looking forward to it. A lot of great voices you're going to hear from in that one. All right, one of soccer's greatest ever players is coming to America.
That's right. Argentina's Lionel Messi has announced his next move after deciding to leave French giants PSG. In an interview with 2 Spanish papers, Messi said he will join MLS team Inter Miami, snubbing a return to former club Barcelona and a potentially lucrative deal in Saudi Arabia. The MLS later tweeted, quote, "The GOAT is coming. Millions of MLS fans all over the world welcome you, Leo." Let's get more on this story with Paul Tenorio. He's a national soccer writer for The Athletic. Paul, it's great to have you with us. I mean, this is huge news, a shock move. Why did Messi choose Inter Miami as his next destination? What do we know?
Well, it is a shock move, and it's complicated because obviously on the emotional side of things, everyone expected Leo Messi to go back to Barcelona. But Barcelona has a complicated financial reality right now where there was no guarantee that they would be able to register him if he signed due to those issues. And then on the other side, financially, the biggest offer was coming from Saudi Arabia. Reports that offer was as high as $1.6 billion for a 3-year contract. So no one was expecting him to turn and pivot to the United States. But Leo Messi said, look, I want to try a new footballing life. I would like to go to the U.S., maybe have a little bit more of a relaxed day-to-day lifestyle in the U.S. versus what he would get at Barcelona or at PSG, and have an opportunity for my family to enjoy life a little bit as well.
And we know Barcelona wanted him back. They issued a statement echoing a little of what you said there, that his decision to, quote, compete in a league with fewer demands, further away from the spotlight, and the pressure he had been subject to in recent years. I'm trying to figure out if that's passive-aggressive at all. Why couldn't Barcelona get him in the end?
Yeah, it's definitely passive-aggressive, and I think that shows the relationship that exists right now between Messi and Barcelona. You know, he left that club at a time where he didn't want to go. They found themselves in huge financial issues, and Messi had to leave. They couldn't re-sign him and guarantee that they would be able to register him as a player. So, you know, the fact that they feel snubbed, I think, is a little bit silly considering the history of how they let him go in the first place to PSG. And again, it comes down to the financial realities that Barcelona faces. They did get a financial plan approved by the La Liga in Spain, but they still couldn't say to Messi for sure, hey, this is what we're going to be able to pay you. We can guarantee you that you'll play. And without those guarantees, and knowing also, Messi said, if I go to Barcelona, I might be giving them more issues financially and having to force sales of players in order to be able to play. He didn't want to do that to the club he loves so much. And so he turned and went to Major League Soccer.
Paul, we've just got like 30 seconds here, but I mean, look, Inter Miami isn't doing very well. They're at the bottom of the league. How much of a win is this for them?
A huge win, and you're right. I mean, this is a team that's at the bottom of MLS right now, ranked last in attendance last year in Major League Soccer. That's not the case anymore. Ticket prices are through the roof. Games are selling out all over MLS or where Messi is going to be. It's a real challenge that Inter Miami faces now. How do you build up a team around the greatest player that's ever played the game and do it in just a few months under MLS's restrictive roster rules? It's going to be a challenge.
All right, Paul Tenorio, thank you so much. Big news here.
Exactly.
Coming up, it's not your ordinary fishing trip.
After the break, I'm going to take you to Ohio in a kayak, where an avid fisherman is showing off his catch of trash. I'm going to explain why. This is Morning News Now.
Welcome back. Rapper Tupac Shakur has been honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame a few days before what would have been his 52nd birthday. Friends, family, and fans came together to remember the legacy of the artist who was murdered in a drive-by shooting in 1996. Accepting the star on his behalf, the rapper's sister said, "Today we're not just honoring a star in the ground, we're honoring the work and the passion that he put into making his dreams come true." So cool to see, Joe.
Exactly. A lot of folks happy about that one. All right. This morning, I want to take you to Cleveland and introduce you to a young man, an avid fisherman who realized he was reeling in more trash than fish some days. So he turned his kayak into a makeshift garbage truck, building a program that has attracted quite the following.
So we're down here at the beautiful Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio. Beautiful. I think she's beautiful, you know, and it's got its problems, but every day we're out here trying to make it even more beautiful.
For Eddie Olshansky, the road to beauty runs through water.
All right, we're in search of garbage?
We sure are.
Navigated by kayak as we comb the river's banks for trash.
All right, got my garbage bag.
There you go. And how about one of these?
Got my grabber.
Bestow upon you a grabber.
All right.
Try not to lose it.
Our search does not take long.
What do you find in there?
We got a beer can, a couple of water bottles, and just some big chunks of styrofoam.
For Eddie, this cleanup is more than the occasional volunteer project. As the founder of an organization called Trash Fish, he's out here at least 5 days a week, and often he's not alone.
I feel confident. I feel really motivated and pumped to help the environment out today.
With help from social media, Eddie has recruited a school of trash fish to help.
There's no money in picking up trash, I promise you that. But without us, I think this river system is far worse off.
The Cuyahoga has a notorious past known decades ago as the Burning River. It was so polluted with oil and waste, it caught fire more than a dozen times. Such environmental disasters led to the creation of the EPA in 1970, and shortly after, the Clean Water Act. Flames are no longer a concern. Trash is. You see, the Cuyahoga flows directly into Lake Erie, the water source for about 12 million people.
This river, this section of this river is the last chance we have to stop this stuff before it actually gets into our drinking water.
Eddie redirects some of that stuff
30 pounds of basketballs
to his garage.
This is part of some of my collection of what I think is interesting stuff that I've pulled out of the river over the last couple of years.
He's found balls, toys, and just a couple years ago, this decades-old Pepsi can.
That just tells me that all the plastic that we put in there today is going to be there in 50 years, it's going to be there in 100 years, it's probably going to be there in 1,000 years.
He brings these items to his speaking engagements, including these old aerosol cans, which look more like modern art.
When stuff like this ends up in the river and it gets punctured, underwater all that foam comes out, and this is what it solidifies as.
The most concerning things he finds, tiny beads of plastic called nurdles. They're the building blocks of almost all plastic products, often confused for food by marine life.
Joe, here's our first nurdle of the day.
Oh, you already found a nurdle?
Certainly did. It never takes long.
We find them all over, even in a plastic soda bottle.
What do you think's also in there?
Nurdles?
There's a bunch of nurdles in here.
You got nurdles in there.
But, like a drop in the ocean, bit by bit, Eddie and his trash fish are making waves by cleaning up the river.
How amazed are you by the things you see in the water?
Oh, I can't even make up the stuff that we find.
Eddie estimates since he started in 2015, they've reeled in nearly 100,000 pounds of trash.
I do feel like you're making a difference, and I think everybody does their part. that you can chip away at it a little bit.
Every bit counts, right?
Every bit counts.
Picking up a bag of trash always feels good out here, and I see the difference that we've made, especially over the last 5 years. This river looks very different from what it did when we started this.
That is what keeps Eddie fishing for trash.
Does this feel like your life's work now?
It sure is at this point. I don't think that I intended for it to be when I first started doing this, but if you were out here every day seeing what I see and you knew the people in this community, you'd want to be out here every day too, I think.
But not everyone is doing that.
Well, you know, maybe they're smarter than I am.
Or maybe you're just doing something extra special.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And he says, while he would love to believe that a day will come when he doesn't need to do this, he's not optimistic that's going to happen anytime soon. So he is prepared to be out on the river as long as he is needed. So how can all of us help, even if we don't go out there with a kayak? Well, Eddie's advice, try to reduce your trash, avoid buying stuff that has too much plastic or too much packaging, and always look for the more sustainable options. Amazing what he is doing. And this really is his life's passion now.
Yeah, great job. You got in there some elbow grease, nurdles,
Didn't
all
fall.
of it.
Exactly, exactly.
No, but really, I mean, just some of that stuff, the Pepsi can, that's unbelievable.
Decades old,
Really,
and it's still
really
there.
makes you think, yeah.
Exactly. All right. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now. Hi, everyone. Good Thursday morning. I'm Savannah Sellers.
I'm Joe Fryer. Right now on Morning News Now, masks on. Millions of people from the Midwest to the East Coast are waking up again to an unhealthy dose of smog and smoke. As those devastating wildfires in Canada burn tens of thousands of acres up north, we are feeling the impact hundreds of miles to the south. Here in the U.S., professional sports postponed, outdoor school activities canceled, even some Broadway shows gone dark. In Washington, the White House was shrouded in smoke, while inside, the Biden administration said it is taking action. We've got more on that, plus the ongoing travel meltdown. New developments this morning in that special counsel probe into former President Trump's handling of classified documents. Sources telling NBC News that Trump's legal team was told by federal prosecutors that he is a target of the investigation. We'll have the latest on what it all means and how it could affect his run for the White House. Plus, the new developments in the January 6th investigation and the Trump ally now ordered to testify in that probe. Papal prognosis. Pope Francis is recovering this morning from a successful 3-hour abdominal surgery. The Vatican telling NBC News, quote, the night passed well. We've got the latest on his condition and how it could affect his busy schedule this summer. Plus, the countdown is on to the 2024 Summer Olympic Games in Paris. Later in the hour, we're going to take you, Kier is going to take you inside the shining beacon at the heart of the city, the Eiffel Tower, as it prepares to glow on the world stage. Love to visit anytime, but especially during the Olympics. It is going to be quite the spectacle with volleyball being played right in front of it.
So cool. It's going to be amazing.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
More on that in a little bit. We're going to begin, of course, with the dangerous smoke from those Canadian wildfires. This morning, millions of Americans are still facing another day of hazy skies and poor air quality.
Already this morning, the FAA issued a ground stop at New York's LaGuardia Airport due to low visibility from this heavy haze. These incredible images are telling the story of major cities completely smothered in smoke. And this morning, the White House is taking action. We've got full coverage, including a look at when we can expect a break from this. That is just ahead. But we start things off with NBC News correspondent Emily Aketa in Brooklyn.
Well, believe it or not, this is actually an improvement compared to yesterday. That heavy haze continuing to obscure New York City's skyline. And you'll see I've got my mask in hand as officials encourage everyone to take precaution and as doctors brace for a potential influx in patients as these kinds of conditions linger.
This morning, as millions are waking up to smoky cityscapes for a third day in a row, the White House stepping in. President Biden extending critical support to Canada, ordering all available federal firefighting assets to help contain the early season wildfires ravaging that country and sending unprecedented plumes of smoke into the U.S. New York City's iconic skyline becoming almost unrecognizable throughout the day yesterday, taking on an apocalyptic-like haze, a startling comparison to earlier this week.
It smells like straight barbecue. And it's only getting worse.
could barely breathe.
Today, air quality alerts are impacting more than 100 million people across 16 states, prompting many to reach for those pandemic-era masks.
It's got me coughing a little. That's why I put the mask on.
From the Midwest to the Northeast and into the Mid-Atlantic, the heavy haze triggering a domino effect of flight and travel delays. Sporting events, including 2 Major League Baseball games, were called off Wednesday as schools in several cities canceled outdoor activities and Google advised employees to stay home. The curtain even coming down on some Broadway shows. New York City has now recorded the worst air quality in the world 2 days in a row. Its AQI, or measure of pollution, spiking above 400, well into the hazardous zone. Researchers say an AQI of 150 is equivalent to about 7 cigarettes a day.
It's concerning simply because you just don't expect to see it. And if you can see it, you know that you're breathing it.
How quickly can people start feeling symptoms?
Oh, very quickly.
And medical experts say symptoms could hit more vulnerable populations especially hard. So think young children, seniors, expecting mothers, those with respiratory conditions like asthma. As for the question, do masks do anything in these kinds of scenarios? The short answer is yes, they do help. And for that reason, New York State is doling out 1 million face coverings today. Back to you.
All right, Emily, thank you so much.
For more on the impact this haze is having on air travel, let's bring in NBC News aviation correspondent Tom Costello, who is at Reagan International in Arlington, Virginia. So, Tom, after a day of disruptions yesterday, even a little bit the night before, we've already seen a ground stop at LaGuardia this morning. I mean, to be clear, ground stops at LaGuardia aren't necessarily uncommon, but still because of this. I mean, what can you tell us about that?
Well, Joe, you fly into Washington at least once a week or every 2 weeks. Take a look. Have you ever seen Washington like this? Look at the haze behind me on that tower back there. And you know, when you land here at Washington, you can immediately look across the river. You see the Lincoln Monument, the Jefferson Memorial, the Capitol. Can't see any of it. It's completely lost in a cloud and a haze of smoke. As for LaGuardia, we did have a ground stop this morning, as you mentioned. They lifted that. However, here's what they're saying right now. They are pausing flights into LaGuardia from the Mid-Atlantic, from much of the Midwest, specifically Ohio, and also from the Northeast. So a significant delay in operations at LaGuardia because of all of the smoke. We had a total of 5,500 flight delays yesterday because of the smoke, about 160 or so cancellations. Take a look at where we stand right now on the airports today that are going to be affected, if not affected already. We expect ground stop and also ground delays. So that was the number yesterday. That's actually not accurate, guys. Let's kill that. That's a global number, not a national number. Let's kill that graphic. The national number, again, 5,500 delays, about 162 cancellations. Okay, flights affected today, or airports affected today. All of the New York City airports. So we're going to have Newark, we're going to have LaGuardia again, slow operations, as well as JFK and Teterboro, which, as you know, is that commuter private airport that's right there on the Hudson River in Jersey. And then as you work your way south, Philadelphia affected today. We do expect slower operations there. Baltimore, Washington, all two airports here and outside of Baltimore. So we expect DCA, Reagan Airport, as well as Dulles. And believe it or not, even Charlotte Airport down south expected to be impacted today because of the smoke and the ripple effect from all of the various delays and cancellations at other American Airlines hubs. Joe?
All right. Tom Costello reporting from Virginia. Tom, thank you so much.
Well, let's get a look at your morning news now. What are the forecast on this?
Meteorologist Angie Lassman joins us again with more. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, guys. Once again, this is the big story today. The air quality issues as that smoke continues to drift in. This is yesterday, but just to give you an idea of how thick that smoke was coming in, you can see just how much of that haze, that kind of orange pinkish color that you see on the map, worked its way through parts of New York and extending into parts of Philadelphia. We saw Boston, Washington, D.C., all dealing with difficulty when it comes to air quality. Western New York was off the charts yesterday. There's a low pressure system that we've been kind of watching for the past couple of days. It's been fairly stagnant and keeping those winds out of the north, just basically helping that smoke to make a beeline into parts of the Northeast and eventually the Midwest. That is eventually going to release. It'll move a little farther away and it'll switch up our winds. We'll have a wind shift coming out of the south here as we get closer to the weekend, and that'll make all the difference with air quality. But in the meantime, still a day where it's going to be difficult to breathe in a lot of spots. 98 million impacted from this unhealthy air that's directly correlated to that wildfire smoke. We have a lot of people across the country, in addition to that number, that are dealing with the ozone as well. That's more focused towards the plains, but nonetheless, 98 million people included in this through the day today because of the smoke. New York, Washington, D.C., Norfolk, all included in this. Detroit woke up to some hazy conditions. And notice where the worst of it is, really stretching through parts of Pennsylvania. We see Philadelphia, Harrisburg included in that, Washington, D.C., all the way up to Scranton is where the worst of those concerns are. It does include hazardous once again today, and you can see where those air quality index numbers are coming in right now. 301 for Allentown, an updated number from Philadelphia, ranging into the very unhealthy area, 185 for New York. It's still going to be a difficult day, so same precautions that you took yesterday you're going to want to do today, but we have positive improvements that will come just in time for the weekend. So as we get into the afternoon hours today, there'll still be some smoke around for New York, Washington, stretching back towards Buffalo, Pittsburgh, and Detroit. But look what happens as we get into tomorrow. We go to 5 o'clock, improvements for New York into Boston. You'll notice places like upstate New York looking a lot better. Washington, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, even in Detroit, you're still going to be in it for tomorrow, and that'll stretch down through parts of the mid-Atlantic. Just remember that if you live a little farther south, you'll kind of notice the haze in the air as well. As we get into Saturday, we'll all start to see some major improvements. It'll be a lot better. We'll have nicer conditions on the way for us to enjoy some outdoor activities finally as we get into the weekend. Speaking of the weekend, a nicer day, as I mentioned, for the Northeast, the Midwest, and the Mid-Atlantic. We deserve it. We will see a severe risk through parts of the middle of the country and cool conditions out of the coast. Then those showers and storms start to work their way to the eastern half of the country, and we'll get into the next work week with some showers, some thunderstorms that we'll have to deal with in the Northeast, guys. But by that time, it'll be welcomed. We'll kind of wash out all the air. We'll be fine with it.
We've learned we'll take rain over smoke any day.
Any day.
All right.
Question.
Angie, thanks so much. And we're going to have much more coming up a little later in this hour. We're going to chat with our medical team about how the poor air quality could be impacting your health, the symptoms to watch out for, and how you can protect yourself. That's just ahead.
Important info. Well, this morning there are new indications that former President Trump could be facing another indictment. A federal grand jury in Florida is meeting this week in special counsel Jack Smith's investigation into Trump's handling of classified material. And two sources briefed on the meeting tell NBC News the former president's lawyers were told in a meeting with Smith that Trump is a target of the investigation. For more on that, we are joined by attorney and legal analyst Angela Sanadella. Angela, good morning. Thank you for being here. So we first want to point out two things. Former President Trump has denied any wrongdoing in the case, and also that he has not been told he is being indicted. So explain to us, though, what a target in a case mean. How often does a target in an investigation eventually become indicted?
So quite often, a target of an investigation ultimately becomes a defendant in an indictment. And here I would liken it to like a train leaving the station, and the defendant now has the choice to go in and speak to the grand jury directly, to testify himself, or to speak with the Attorney General, the Department of Justice, the prosecutors involved. It's almost like an invitation, because prosecutors at this point want more information. They want all the information prior to bringing the indictment, prior to bringing the charges. So if Trump decides that he or members of his team want to come directly and testify or speak with the prosecutors, that could possibly help him at this moment. Beyond that, though, it's almost like an indictment is looming. If he doesn't stop it, it's probably going to happen.
Okay, so that's on this classified documents case. Well, special counsel Jack Smith is also investigating January 6th. And according to two sources familiar with that matter, former Trump ally Steve Bannon was subpoenaed by a federal grand jury. Bannon's attorney did decline to comment. But what information is Smith looking to get from Bannon, and how do we expect this to play out?
So it's possible here that the prosecutors are going to be working multiple angles at the same time. First, whether or not Steve Bannon himself has any criminal liability. And due to his level of centrality in this entire investigation and to the events leading up and after the January 6th incident, it is very possible that he could be looking at charges himself. However, when questioned by the grand jury, it is also likely that he would plead the fifth. And if that's the case, then the prosecutors could decide, are they going to offer him immunity if they want full cooperation? So that's the next step. Is he going to plead? Is there going to be immunity involved? If their primary and only target is Trump, then it seems likely they would want full information from Bannon at this point, because he is one of the central figures who has intimate information of Trump's state of mind, of what he was thinking, how premeditated any of this stuff was.
And Angela, if Trump were to be indicted in one of these investigations, because there's a lot going on here, does one potentially impact the other? What are some of the legal ramifications the former president could possibly face as we near a decision?
Well, they don't necessarily impact each other, and there's still a wide variety of charges that could be brought, frankly, in multiple jurisdictions. So at this point, it's really up to the discretion of the Department of Justice and ultimately in the discretion in the hands of the Attorney General himself. However, I would say that this is not just a legal storm. This is a legal tornado. Having to battle one indictment is difficult enough, but when things are brewing all across the country, he's in for a very stressful next year.
All right, Angela, thank you so much.
Pope Francis is recovering this morning after a 3-hour operation on Wednesday to repair a hernia. Doctors say the 86-year-old pontiff made it through the surgery with no complications. NBC News foreign correspondent Megan Fitzgerald is outside the hospital in Rome and joins us with the latest. Megan, good morning.
Joe, good morning to you. Yeah, the Vatican says that the Pope is doing well. No complications, as you mentioned. He slept well and long overnight. Now, he will remain in the hospital behind me for the next several days as he continues his journey to recovery. This morning, Pope Francis is waking up in a Rome hospital, recovering from intestinal surgery after being taken to the hospital Wednesday afternoon. The Vatican saying there were no complications.
The surgical operation and the general anesthesia were well tolerated by the Pope. Now he's awake, he's fine, and he's already at work.
But you wouldn't know by watching that the Pope was in pain for the last several months, smiling and waving while holding an audience just before heading to surgery Wednesday. It's just the latest in a string of health issues plaguing the pontiff. In 2021, he spent 10 days in the hospital, having 13 inches of his colon removed. The Pope complained of bad long-term side effects of the general anesthesia, that experience causing him to opt out of surgery for a painful knee issue, which is why some Vatican analysts believe the surgery Wednesday must have been urgent.
So the fact that the Pope agreed to having it means that it is absolutely necessary.
Pope Francis also suffering from sciatica, ailments that have caused him to use a wheelchair and a cane. The 86-year-old just hospitalized in March for bronchitis. Shortly after being discharged, he was presiding over Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday Mass.
The Pope is certainly a trooper. He is determined to serve the church. And even if at 86 he has a health history that's a little bit complicated, he's really determined to continue with his agenda.
The health concerns not seeming to slow Pope Francis down. The pontiff even baptizing a baby while recovering in a hospital in March. Now, look, doctors say that Pope Francis will be cleared to travel once he recovers, and that's good news because he's got this jam-packed schedule in August where he's expected to visit Portugal and Mongolia. Guys.
All right, Megan, thank you so much.
Coming up on this hour of Morning News now, continuing coverage of those devastating Canadian wildfires and the impact all that smoke and smog is having on the planet. And get this, today, it's World Oceans Day.
Plus, new developments this morning in the high-profile disappearance of Natalie Holloway. The suspect in that case is now being handed over to the FBI, investigating another case. We'll explain why next. We're back with an NBC News exclusive, an announcement by California's Governor Gavin Newsom on gun control, which could have a national impact. NBC News correspondent Jacob Soboroff sat down with Governor Newsom and has this report.
Why a constitutional amendment and why now?
Well, why now is pretty self-evident that a lot of the laws we've passed are being rolled back by the federal courts.
To be clear, you're not calling for the abolition of the Second Amendment.
No, this is an existential crisis that we're experiencing every single day.
Saying he's fed up with Congress's inability to act, California Governor Gavin Newsom is proposing something never done before on gun control, having states work together to pass a U.S. constitutional amendment on guns that would implement 4 measures nationwide. Raise the minimum age for buying a firearm to 21, mandate universal background checks, require a reasonable waiting period for gun purchases, and ban the sale of assault rifles to civilians. To achieve this, he'll need 2/3 of states to propose the same amendment. That would trigger a constitutional convention, where 3/4 of states would have to vote yes for the amendment to pass.
But more than half of these state legislatures are controlled by Republicans. So how is this possible? How is this going to happen?
That's possible because their constituency demands it.
In fact, a recent Fox News poll found most Americans are in favor of these measures.
There's not a parent out there, not one parent, you included, that doesn't think about these things when you send your kids to school.
You know very well what the critics are going to say about this. California has some of the strictest gun laws in the nation. In the first month of the year, between Half Moon Bay and Monterey Park, 18 people were killed. That's what they're going to say. What do we need this 28th Amendment for?
And what California's gun death rate today is 73% lower than Texas. These federal judges want to turn America into Texas. We cannot let that happen.
The 19th Amendment to the Constitution that gave women the right to vote, it took 40 years or so. Do you think that the 28th Amendment, if it's passed, will it happen in your lifetime?
I hope so. If you don't start, it will never happen.
And Jacob joins us now, so we're all having to think back to our poli-sci classes to remember how this works, because we really haven't seen it practically happen in real life for so long. But as you point out, to even get this amendment off the ground, California would need to be joined by 2/3 of other states in advocating for this. So has Governor Newsom shored up support, especially in states with Republican-controlled legislatures?
Yeah, and in fact, Joe, it's never happened in the way Governor Newsom is trying to do it, proposing a constitutional amendment outside of Congress. He says not yet when it comes to shoring up support, but it's his first line of business. There is no question this is going to be an uphill battle, especially with needing to convince more than half of the states with Republican-controlled legislatures to go along with this, and that historical hurdle that no U.S. constitutional amendment proposed by states have ever actually passed, Joe.
All right, Jacob, thank you so much.
Well, a suspect in one of the world's most high-profile missing persons cases is being extradited back to the U.S. today. This morning, Joran van der Sloot, the prime suspect in the disappearance of Natalie Holloway, was transported from a prison in Lima, Peru, to the airport. He's facing extortion and wire fraud charges related to Holloway's disappearance. NBC News correspondent Guad Venegas has more.
This morning, 35-year-old Joran van der Sloot, the prime suspect in Natalie Holloway's disappearance nearly 2 decades ago, is being handed over to the FBI. He's facing federal wire fraud and extortion charges in Alabama for promising information to Natalie's mother, Beth Holloway, about how her daughter died and where her body was located. Authorities say he asked for $250,000, but was given $25,000 in an FBI sting operation. Van der Sloot's lawyer claims his client was tricked into it. Allegations the Holloway family tells NBC News are patently untrue. Van der Sloot is currently serving a 28-year sentence in Peru for the murder of a woman there, Stephanie Flores. He will be flown from Lima to Birmingham, Alabama, in the hands of American authorities, where he could face a judge as soon as today.
One is that he will need to be arraigned on the charges against him. The other is that a decision will need to be made about whether to keep him in custody pending trial. That would seem to be a foregone conclusion.
The move to the U.S. happening despite a last-ditch legal effort by Van der Sloot's lawyer this week to fight his surrender after originally agreeing to it. Joyce Vance is the former U.S. attorney who signed the original indictment back in 2010.
Because there's no way of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that she's dead, there's no way to charge this case as a murder. But it will be justice and it will matter.
18-year-old Natalie Holloway vanished during a high school graduation trip to Aruba back in 2005. Authorities say Van der Sloot and several others were with her the last night she was seen alive. The teen's remains have never been found, but today, a long-awaited reckoning for her family is one step closer to reality.
Until Joran faces the extortion charges in the U.S., then justice is not being served.
All right, our thanks to Guad Venegas for that report.
International headlines starting with the latest from the dam breach in Ukraine.
NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley joins us now with the latest on that. Hey, Matt, good morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. So the destruction of that dam in the Kherson region could have a catastrophic effect on the search for landmines. And it comes as a warning from the Red Cross. Now, landmines dislodged by flooding pose risks not just for civilians in the area, but also for the rescue workers who are desperately trying to evacuate people from that flood zone. Russia and Ukraine have blamed each other for the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam this week, which breached early Tuesday and flooded low-lying regions around the Dnipro River. About 3,000 or nearly 3,000 people have already been evacuated from the region, and we just heard this information. 5 people have died because of the flooding, according to Russian authorities. And now to Africa, and actually to its consulates around the world. Senegal says it will temporarily close its overseas consulates in France, Italy, and the United States following political protests against the sentencing of a popular opposition leader. Diplomatic missions in Paris, Bordeaux, Milan, and New York have faced demonstrations and attacks since protests in the Senegalese capital broke out last week. The consulate building in Milan was the worst hit, according to Senegal's foreign ministry. Italian news agency RAI said dozens of protesters looted Senegal's consulate there on Monday, and Senegal's foreign ministry said machines for making passports and national identity cards were destroyed. Ousmane Sonko, the opposition leader, was sentenced last week on charges of corrupting youth, though he hasn't been arrested. That charge accuses Sonko of immoral behavior towards a person younger than 21. And now to Europe, where a Greek diver has said he has located the remains of a long-lost British submarine that went missing during World War II. Kostas Thakaridis, a veteran Greek diver who specializes in such finds, said that he had located the HMS Triumph in an undisclosed location under the Aegean Sea. The sub had been declared missing in January 1942 with 64 people on board. But the search for the shipwreck has been going on since the late 1990s.
Wow.
Guys.
All right, cool discovery. Matt, thank you so much.
Coming up, continuing coverage of that air quality nightmare that is impacting millions of Americans this morning.
After the break, we will clear the air, so to speak, on how all this smog can affect your health. We've got our doctor on call next. Stay with us. This is Morning News Now.
We're back with some breaking news this morning. Conservative evangelist and media mogul Pat Robertson has died. The longtime religious leader and activist galvanized the modern Christian right and cultivated a massive national following. He created the Christian Broadcasting Network and founded the Christian Coalition, which has become one of the cornerstones of the modern Republican Party. But Robertson also regularly drew criticism for his statements about the LGBTQ community and other minority groups. Robertson was 93 years old, and we are going to continue to follow this and bring you the very latest as it comes in throughout the morning.
Let's return to our coverage of the impact the smoke from those Canadian wildfires is having in several states.
120 million people are at risk due to air quality today, with 100 million of those due to the wildfire smoke. New York City is among the worst hit areas. Air quality advisories are in place for all 5 boroughs. Of course, that's a lot of those pictures you're seeing us right here in New York. Dr. Akshay Syal, NBC News medical fellow, joins us now to talk about the impact this is having on our health. So, Dr. Syal, how concerned should we be when we're spending any time outside?
Yeah, it's going to depend on who you are, right? So for most people who have healthy immune systems and don't have a lot of chronic conditions, really this is going to be a transient sort of source of irritation. And so I think a lot of us have sort of felt that, right? Walking around, you got the itchy eyes, maybe your throat, your nose get itchy, you might have some headaches. But for those who have, lung conditions like asthma, maybe you're a smoker or you have COPD, which is a lung disease, maybe you're pregnant or you're over the age of 65, we're worried about these people because they could develop breathing problems. And that's really where the trouble lies. If there's a lot of smoke and pollution in the air, you could see that exacerbate some of the inflammation in the lung, causing those breathing problems, which could ultimately wind you in the hospital.
Let's talk about, you mentioned the symptoms that people might be experiencing because of these air pollutants. And then how do you know if it's actually serious?
Yeah, great question. So the symptoms we can see, it's going to depend on who you are. But for most people, they're going to see the sort of irritation, right? The headaches, the irritated eyes, the throat maybe get a little bit scratchy. You might, have some difficulty breathing, and that's really where the big symptom is. If you start to develop that, you should definitely call your doctor or head to your emergency room. If you find that you can't catch your breath, maybe you're having chest pain, maybe you're having to gasp for air, that's really the red flag and warning sign to look out for.
And it sounds like that you said that so far it's been okay, right, in terms of hospitals here in New York?
Yeah, we've talked to all the major hospitals here in the city, and they haven't really seen that spike in emergency room visits for things like asthma or flare-ups like that. We did talk to a pulmonologist out in New Jersey who's seen that a lot of her patients with those chronic diseases we talked about are having a little bit of trouble, and she's actually had to send some to the emergency room. But overall, broadly speaking, we haven't seen that big spike, but all the hospitals here in New York tell us they are bracing and they are prepared should that happen.
And I see there you've got a prop with you, something we've become used to, but we should dust off maybe, right?
This bad boy here, this KN95, it's really designed to protect those small little particles from the smoke from getting into your nose and mouth and even into your bloodstream. You want to avoid using those surgical masks or those cloth masks. They aren't really designed to prevent those really tiny particles. And if you want to be ultimately even more protected at home, a HEPA filter, they range from anywhere from $50 to $1,000, depending on how much money you want to spend. They can actually prevent those little fine particles from circulating in your house as well.
I actually did have the fan with the filter going last night because we
could
live
smell
higher up, and it feels like we were getting a lot more smoke because of where we live. So.
Exactly.
All right.
You could totally smell it in our apartment. We were talking about getting one of those. Yeah. Dr. Sile, thank you very much. Important info.
Anytime.
This year, drag queens have been the focus of anti-LGBTQ legislation around the country, with some lawmakers pushing to restrict drag performances. One such law in Tennessee was recently declared unconstitutional by a federal judge. For our in-depth special Pride 2023 Out Front, I spoke about this legislation with two drag superstars, Britta Filter, who's also a political activist, and Kennedy Davenport, a TV personality and actor. Britta, when we hear from lawmakers who are promoting anti-trans legislation or legislation that is aimed at drag performances, we often hear them say it's about children and protecting children. When you hear that, what's your response?
It has nothing to do with protecting children. I mean, essentially, as a drag queen, I am just as dressed up as a Disney princess is at Disneyland, and it's not protecting children at all. What it is they're truly just coming for trans individuals when they do this anti-drag legislation, and it's crazy to me.
Kennedy, what do you think is the key to combating the narrative and to getting people to feel more compassion toward the LGBTQ community amid all of the legislation we've seen over the last few years?
I really think I kind of related to people that really don't know who you are and don't know how you live and judge you based on that, them not knowing you.
You know, I think a lot of it is people just being uneducated. Like people are afraid of what they don't know.
On top of that, we are people. We go through the same thing. Any heterosexual or whatever you want to call yourself, we have gone through the same thing, if not more. And drag, and people ask me, what is drag to you? Drag is total liberation. So when we have the opportunity to perform or to be in front of people, that's our opportunity to release whatever's going on. And we share everything that we've been through on stage through performance. Drag is love, and that's the message.
We hope you'll tune in to our special tonight for more on this topic and others impacting the LGBTQ plus community. It's called Pride 2023 Out Front and streams at 10:30 p.m. Eastern right here on NBC News.
There you go. Plans for the night. All right, coming up, a shock to the world of golf that's been anything but par for the course.
After the break, the public backlash from both golfers and analysts alike surrounding that surprise high-profile merger of the PGA and Saudi Arabia's LIV Golf.
We are back with more on that shock merger in the golfing world. This morning, there's a growing backlash over the deal to unite the PGA Tour with its former bitter rival, LIV Golf. On top of that, there are a lot of unanswered questions about how it's all going to work. NBC's Kaylee Hartung has the latest.
It's hard for me to not sit up here and feel somewhat like a sacrificial lamb.
Golf superstar Rory McIlroy among those completely surprised by this week's stunning shift in the sport. The PGA Tour announcing it plans to partner with Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, creating a new for-profit company, along with the PGA European Tour.
It's just a monumental change to the entire structure of the sport.
Professional golf has been in turmoil the past 2 years after the Saudi-backed LIV Tour totally disrupted the game, poaching big-name players from the PGA with huge paychecks, triggering lawsuits and fueling animosity among the game's top players and fans. But PGA Commissioner Jay Monahan offering this reassurance.
I say that their loyalty will be rewarded.
When you hear Commissioner Monahan say that loyalty will be rewarded, practically, what does that look like?
He has a blank checkbook now to make all these problems just disappear.
McElroy, a four-time major champ and LIV's most outspoken critic, addressing the tension that now exists.
There still has to be consequences to actions. You know, the people that left the PGA Tour irreparably harmed. We can't just welcome them back in. Like, that's not going to happen.
Though this new partnership agreement ends all pending litigation, Commissioner Monahan is facing criticism that extends far beyond the golf course. Families of 9/11 victims who've protested LIV Golf, calling it an attempt at sports-washing Saudi Arabia's human rights violations and alleged ties to terrorism, say Monahan betrayed them.
I did not communicate to very important constituents, including the families of 9/11. And I regret that. I really do.
Now, with billions of Saudi dollars expected to be invested in the future of golf, even McElroy believes ultimately it will be good for the sport.
At the end of the day, money talks, and you'd rather have them as a partner.
Our thanks to Kaylee for that report. So we're essentially waiting for answers to questions like what penalties will LIV players pay versus how PGA Tour members' loyalty could be paid back. What we do know is that these golfers will be playing for more money than ever before as a result of this new deal.
Artificial intelligence and robots are hard at work on America's farms. And it's not just new companies jumping on board. Some old school agricultural brands are joining the AI movement as well. NBC News technology correspondent Jacob Ward has more on this as part of our AI Revolution series.
Okay, yes, it's a killer robot with an AI brain. But hear me out. It kills weeds. On a 2,000-acre organic farm in Central California, this $1.2 million machine does the work of 30 people 24 hours a day.
The machine is thinking. It's learning. It's understanding what it's seeing.
What AI is great at is telling the difference between things. In this case, the difference between chard and a weed, and then killing the weeds with lasers.
CEO Paul Mikesell has invented a system that fries weeds too small for a human hand to grab, in bursts that last only milliseconds. The field smells like burnt popcorn.
The whole trick here is the lasers disrupt the cellular cycle within the plant with heat energy.
It takes a rack of servers to recognize 40 crops and 80 types of weeds.
This machine has got more computing power than 24 Teslas in it. It's essentially a mobile data center.
The farm's owner says the laser weeder will pay for itself in a single year and that it solves his single biggest problem, which is finding workers.
We're just not getting the influx of new folks that want to come in to this deal. Now, in a job like behind us on this tractor where someone could be making, a really good wage, $30 an hour, he's got a laptop, that's a little easier to find that person.
Labor unions say they want tech to make the work easier as long as we don't simply toss people aside after decades of brutal labor.
To the extent that automation can make life better for farm workers by making those jobs less physically demanding, safer, more dignified, we welcome it. Our concern is that automation will allow employers to basically discard them.
AI is spreading through farming. There's the broccoli bot built by Oregon college students to harvest the vegetable. And John Deere has been plowing ahead with several kinds of AI technology. For Paul Mikesell, it's about more than just zapping weeds.
The data that comes out of these images will be incredibly valuable for farmers to be able to predict what's going to happen in the future based on past action.
So you're not just killing weeds, but actually harvesting data that we can use to make crops better.
Yeah, that's right. If you talk to any farmer, they'll tell you it's not just about the data, but about the insight that you can get from the data.
Mikesell expects AI will allow robots to work in fields and factories in entirely new ways.
The capabilities are too great, and the wave is only starting right now.
Jake Ward, NBC News, Soledad, California.
All right, let's get to some financial headlines. GameStop is making major immediate changes to its top brass.
CNBC's Silvana Henao joins us with that and other money news. Silvana, good morning.
Hey, Joe. Hey, Savannah. Good morning to you. So video game company GameStop has fired CEO Matthew Furlong and appointed Ryan Cohen as executive chairman effective immediately. Now, the company didn't provide a reason for Furlong's firing. GameStop shares dropped more than 20% in extended trading on the news. And Cohen, he's the co-founder of pet retailer Chewy. He took a stake in GameStop in 2020 and was named to the GameStop board in January 2021, along with 2 other former Chewy executives. The CEO of Campbell's Soup telling CNBC's Jim Cramer on Wednesday that despite the company's mixed earnings report, he's confident that condensed soup products, especially the brand staples like chicken noodle and tomato, are profitable. CEO Mark Klaus said Campbell's Soup sales have been better than before the pandemic, especially among millennial clientele, many of whom are getting older and starting families. Campbell also owns several well-known food and snack lines, including Pepperidge Farm, Snyder's of Hanover, Lance, V8, and Prego. Live streaming platform Twitch is reversing course, removing its new branded content guidelines just a day after the rules were announced. The new rules were set to go into effect on July 1st, and they would have restricted how ads could appear on the platform, but Twitch content creators weren't happy, and Twitch walking the changes back, saying in a Wednesday night tweet, these guidelines are bad for you and bad for Twitch, and we are removing them immediately, guys.
All right, Silvana, thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Hawaii's Kilauea volcano is erupting again. This video shows lava spewing from a crater on the volcano's summit. Geologists say that they have been on alert for weeks because of increased seismic activity in the area. Emergency management officials do not believe there is any threat to the public at this time, but will continue to keep an eye on potential hazards.
All right, well, today is World Ocean Day. It's meant to be a day of awareness and action around the world's largest bodies of water and the creatures who live in them.
According to worldoceanday.org, last year more than 140 countries celebrated the day through various events and actions. We're lucky to be joined by Jeff Corwin, biologist and host of Ocean Treks with Jeff Corwin. Jeff, good to have you with us. Happy World Ocean Day to you. I mean, as you know, the news today, we can't escape the air quality issues that we're largely seeing on land because of climate change and the Canadian wildfires. But talk about how is our changing climate impacting the oceans?
Well, good morning to you both, Joe and Savannah. And this is my backyard. I'm very blessed. I live in a little island off New England. And I think about the challenges we face with the oceans every day. Climate change is having a big impact on our planet's oceans. For example, the smoke that's drifting and meandering its way from Canada that I have right here in my backyard, that actually enters our oceans. We know that our oceans are warming up because of our changing oceans are becoming more acidified. The Bay of Maine is the warmest body of water that's warming up on our planet. Because of that, it's caused our native cod fisheries to crash. So that's just the example and impact from climate change, never mind all the other challenges we face in protecting our planet's oceans.
Yeah, and Jeff, I know that your team has captured quite a bit of dramatic video, one specifically that we're going to show in just a moment. Here it is, showing some of these issues that we are facing in our oceans. This is this dramatic North Atlantic right whale entanglement. That's the footage we're seeing. Tell us about this. Describe to us what is in this video, and then how climate change, and then, of course, pollution, just the trash we're seeing in our oceans, is impacting these sea creatures.
Yes, Savannah. So you're looking at some very dramatic footage. This is from IFAW, the International Fund for Animal Welfare. Their partners includes the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. And this is the price we are paying. This is the North Atlantic right whale. And the North Atlantic right whale is now on the verge of collapse. Only 340 individuals survived. Wow. They only produced 11 surviving offspring this year. So what's impacting them? Well, they migrate, literally these waters right here, they migrate their way up from the south to the north. IFAW has a marine mammal rescue center right here off the Cape. They also have this incredible research boat known as the Song of the Whale. And them, along with global research partners, have detected that these animals are getting entangled by ghost nets and fishing gear. You talk about plastics. We collectively have put, and this is a mind-boggling figure, 363 billion pounds of plastics into our ocean. Some of this plastics, like nets, entangle these whales. They get to the Bay of Maine, they cannot feed because that ecosystem is crashing. The other challenge they face is that as they're migrating up north, they're getting hit by boats, by container ships. All of these factors is driving this species to extinction. You mentioned fishing. So around the world, we consume about 150 million tons of fish every year.
A day like this, Jeff, is a day to raise awareness so that we can figure out what we can do differently. We have less than a minute here, but what are your top tips for people to make the world better and to make some changes?
So, for example, with the North Atlantic great whale, we have now state-of-the-art strategically deploying lobster gear that can make a huge difference. Changing those lanes, those shipping lanes, just a little bit will give these whales the space they need. Reducing our plastics makes a big difference. And we see that recovery works. This water behind me at one time faced incredible conservation challenges. It's now one of the cleanest bodies of water on our planet because of good regulation and good conservation. So it's not too late. But that moment is now to save our planet's oceans and to save creatures like the North Atlantic right whale before we lose them.
A great example behind you there that we can actually make a difference.
Yes.
Jeff Corwin,
yeah, I'm going to go fishing in about 10 minutes.
All right,
go.
good luck. We wish you the best, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for the work you're doing. Wow,
My
so
pleasure.
important. Coming up, we're continuing our countdown to the Paris Summer Olympic Games that are coming up next year.
After the break, it is a beacon that's almost synonymous with Paris. Not Keir Simmons. We're talking about the Eiffel Tower. He'll be there as it gets ready to shine in 2024. That's next. Good to have you back. The wrestling world is mourning a legend today after it was announced that WWE Hall of Famer Hossein Khosrow Ali Vaziri has passed away at 81 years old. You probably know him as the Iron Sheik, one of the most popular wrestlers of the 80s, regularly facing off against Hulk Hogan and other stars. He was born in Iran before moving to the U.S. and joining what would become the WWE. In recent years, he became a social media star. WWE tweeted, "The Iron Sheik became a cultural phenomenon transcending the realm of professional wrestling to become a pop culture icon." He was sort of the epitome of an 80s bad guy back in those days of wrestling. So.
Oh, wow. Well, rest in peace, and I love whenever you get to talk about one of your many passions.
The master of the camel clutch, in case you were wondering. See?
I would like to know more about that.
There you go.
There we go. We'll talk about it after. All right, finally this hour, the countdown for the 2024 Olympics is on, and organizers in Paris are going above and beyond to make these games as special as possible. And they're getting a little help from a certain landmark. NBC News Chief International Correspondent Keir Simmons joins us now from Paris with an inside look at some of the surprises being set up ahead of the games. Hey, Keir, good morning.
Hey there, good morning to you. Did you know that the Eiffel Tower used to be red? This color is the color that Gustav Eiffel, who designed it, liked the most. And you know, we got a chance to meet his great-granddaughter, who told us why she's so proud about the connection between the Eiffel Tower and the Statue of Liberty. Rising more than 1,000 feet above the City of Light, at night illuminating the Paris sky, the Eiffel Tower is one of the most iconic sights in the world, and the centerpiece for the Olympics. Kicking off the countdown to the Games, it will tower over the event just as it did the last time the Olympics were here, 100 years ago. NBC News was given special access to the tower and an incredible insight into Gustav Eiffel himself, who designed her and helped design another beacon of freedom and modernity, the Statue of Liberty.
Madame Eiffel.
Miriam Lorna de Eiffel is Gustav Eiffel's great-great-granddaughter.
Look at this. This is formidable.
As with so many modern ideas, the tower was not initially welcomed by all Parisians.
She was too modern. She was too modern and she was frightening. It was a monster of iron. It's so frightening for people.
Paris just wouldn't be Paris without the Eiffel Tower.
She's more than 130 years old now, so it takes a little TLC to keep her functioning and beautiful.
It's safe, right? It is, because thanks to these guys. Thanks to this guy, it's safe. So it's a lot of painting, firstly, because all this... well, look, because there's guys here,
And there were guys up here.
So we have to paint it every 7 years to protect the iron of the structures from the rust.
Jean-Francois Martin is Eiffel Tower president and helped lead the bid for Paris to make Olympic history again.
In 1924, for the Paris Olympics, it was the first competition that was live broadcasted on the radio. And the radio was on the Eiffel Tower. So we have a story with the Olympics.
Beneath the tower, a rare opportunity to see how the elevators work. What goes up must come down. They are hydraulic powered, using water, taking 100 trips up and down each day. In the 19th century, this was an engineering feat, helping folks avoid the stairs. There are a lot of them. But amazingly, Gustave Eiffel preferred them. And he would climb the stairs up here every day.
He had his office here, and he went every day to work.
Should we go and meet your great-great-grandfather? That office still there today. Wow, this is amazing.
And so moving for me too. My grandfather with his blue eyes, a very athletic man. He was a swimmer, a fencer.
And speaking of athletes, the tower will be a focal point of next year's Olympics. Several events taking place at the base. Just down there, the beach volleyball. You could call this the nosebleed seats. The centerpiece of the Paris Games, like her American cousin, the Statue of Liberty, represents a message from the past about believing in the future, about the power of hopes and dreams. For 44 years, the Eiffel Tower was the tallest building in the world, surpassing the Washington Monument, which makes it, of course, as I said in the piece, a perfect place to watch some of those Olympic events. But, Savannah, if you do get to come here to Paris, one thing, remember your sunglasses and to always be armed with a glass of rosé. I'm turning you green with envy now, aren't I?
You know, Keir, I was just in Paris, and those were two things that I had on me many times.
That you kept with you at all times.
Yeah. By the way, those are the only nosebleed seats I've ever wanted.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. How cool, beach volleyball right there. It's amazing. All right, Keir with an epic assignment. Thank you.
Thank you, Keir. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.